Hello and welcome to the Astro Garden, a place for astrologers to chat all things astro. I'm your host Janessa of By Jove Astrology. Thanks for tuning in. Hello. Today is Thursday, November 21st, 2024. The very first day of Sagittarius season this year. I'm very excited to be at this point of the year. It's one of my favorite seasons, and I felt like this was the perfect time to start a new series that I would like to do called The Essence of the Signs. So, starting with the essence of Sagittarius. So I'll just jump right into it. I plan to have some visuals available, some links to some sources available for you to look at as you listen along. And all right, here we go. So I guess my qualifications for talking about Sagittarius, not that you need any to talk about any specific sign, but this one I wanted to do first because, like I said, it's one of my favorites. It's my 10th house. So 10th house season started today for me. It's also where I have my midheaven at 9 degrees, my Saturn at 17 degrees, and Uranus at 23 degrees. So I kind of have a lot going on in that house in my chart. It's my only house with angular placements, meaning in the first, the fourth, the 7th, and the 10th. So it's kind of like, this has been a little bit of like a sneaky house for me in terms of, it doesn't have any like super personal placements. Like, I have planets there and I have my midheaven there, but it wasn't as obvious to me how much of a role this has played in my life until I got a little bit further into studying astrology. So that's that. I also have a lot of Sagittarius people that I just love dearly in my life. My husband's a Sag rising. My middle child is a Sag sun. I have many friends who fall into Sagittarius in different ways. And yeah, there's something about them that I can't get enough of. So that being said, let's talk about the essence of the sign. So I like to start, anytime I talk about a sign, I really like to start by rooting into the physical realm and like the material realm and how it translates to that, because all of the zodiac is really based on the quality of light at that time of year, if we're looking at traditional astrology. So if we think about that, if we think about the roots of astrology, it's all coming down to physical observations of the sun, of the moon, of the planets, things that could be seen and experienced just as a human being without the aid of any kind of technology. Now we have technology like telescopes and things that have uncovered more for us with outer planets and the like. But I find that when we're talking about signs, it really helps to root into that physical side. So in the Northern Hemisphere, Sagittarius season, the most important thing to know about it, from my perspective, that kind of summarizes all of the archetype, that it always comes back to, is that it ends with the winter solstice. So the shortest day of the year. We can think about it, it's the ending of a season. It's the end of the fall. We just came through, fall starts with Libra at the equinox. Then we go through Scorpio season. And then we get to Sagittarius, and I kind of think of that journey as being like this journey to like the center of the earth, or this journey to the underground. So like Libra season kicks it off. We kind of start that journey. There's an appreciation for all of the beauty. It's a Venus sign. And then we get into Scorpio season, and the dark is really starting to settle in physically, like like that you can notice outside. The days are getting shorter. Scorpio season is when we have our time change in the United States, or most places in the United States. So we fall back an hour. That means that it starts to get darker even earlier, even without a time change. The days are getting shorter, but we don't have any kind of like vision yet of any kind of end of that. There's like no end in sight. I like to think of this as like this journey underground where we, maybe we have a torch or something with us, but we're not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel during Scorpio season. It's just fixed, it's going in one direction, and the direction is dark. There's no end in sight. There's no light yet. But once we hit that Sagittarius season, it's like, for me at least, I experience this as like a big breath of fresh air. It's like I've reached the bottom of this tunnel, and either I can see a way out, or I've turned around and I'm coming back up the tunnel because I've completed my journey and I'm starting to head back toward the light where I came in. So if we think about this in terms of like our regular like calendar for the year, Sagittarius season aligns perfectly with like the American holiday of Thanksgiving, which is very, as a holiday, as far as holidays go, there's a lot of colonialism and a lot of negative things wrapped up in the meaning of that holiday. And I don't mean to dismiss that at all. When I celebrate Thanksgiving now, my focus is not at all on any kind of colonialism or conquering of Native Americans or of taking away of their land or rights or lives. My focus is really just on gratitude, a day of gratitude, while also acknowledging the wrongs that have happened and not dismissing those either. So I don't mean to diminish that in any way, the heaviness that can come with that day for a lot of people. But I do also feel like there's an opportunity here of a celebration of gratitude. And I think that that's something that American culture in particular lacks in general. So I do try to take that opportunity to spin it into this other type of practice for me and my family. And in that sense, I feel like it is perfect that Sagittarius season starts right as, typically right before that holiday, and kicks off like a whole season of celebrating for most people in North America and in the Western world. So, that being said, we'll get into like more of that archetype in a minute, but I just want to call out that Sagittarius then, because we see that light at the end and it comes at the end of a season, we would call it a mutable sign. There's 3 different modalities with signs. There is cardinal, which starts things. There is fixed, which carries out the thing that the cardinal sign started. And then there's mutable, which comes at the end of a season when we're transitioning into the next season. So Sagittarius is the mutable fire sign. Just like modalities, we have other elements. The elements are fire, water, air, and earth. So when we think of fire, we think of passion and lots of energy. And for me, fire really speaks to like spirit, not so much like emotions, not so much like thoughts, and definitely not like the material realm. It speaks to this fourth thing that is more like instinct than intuition. And I think it just has like a quality of being of spirit, if that makes sense to you. So spirit being like this instinctual knowing that we have, and this instinctual drive that we have to be out in the world. And then when we combine those two, the modality and the element together, I think it's helpful to like give an image. So for me, a mutable fire sign sounds like a wildfire, that it's not really contained, that it is moving, that it is not consistent, that it can kind of pop up here and pop up there. So a little bit wild, a little bit unruly, a little bit uncontained. And I think that that's a really key way of describing Sagittarius as well. So then let's add in another element here. We've got the ruler of Sagittarius, which is Jupiter. So Jupiter is the planet associated with luck, optimism, abundance, growth, and expansion. It's also associated with things like wisdom and religion and government, and I think in some ways you could put law or order with Jupiter. Sometimes those things fall to Saturn, or a combination of both, but there's definitely like an ordered nature that Jupiter likes too. But some of like the Jupiterian archetypes then I think of like are very, just like Sagittarius being the shortest time of the year, but also celebrating, I guess that's something I should say more explicitly. So because Sagittarius comes and ends with the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, where it can see this light, there is a duality to it. And this is a mutable thing. It can see that like, yes, it's dark right now, and also it's going to get lighter. So it can hold both of those things at the same time. It's very much about seeing both sides of things. It's about paradox and holding things that might be separate at the same time, but also seeing the continuity between them. And yeah, just that like both things can be true. So that being said, if we talk about the nature of Jupiter and like the Jupiterian archetypes, there's a side of Jupiter that is very generous and giving, and very, like if we think of abundance, like I think of like a lavish feast and like lots of wine and lots of like partying, essentially, if we're talking in like 2024 terms. Like I can think of Jupiter as like this party animal, Hence why it makes a lot of sense that Sagittarius season comes when we're starting to have a lot of different celebrations. But then there's this other side of Jupiter that is like very wise and that is very like knowing and understanding. And again, like the duality here, like there's a side to Jupiter that is very much like the monk, like the priest that can see all sides of things and that has a lot of perspective, and that maybe has partied in the past or has had, experienced one extreme of the Jupiterian archetype and has now swung the other direction into like being a little bit more orderly and to living maybe a quieter life. Like if we think of the party side of Sagittarius, we can think of that as like that, oh, we see like the light is coming, or we've reached the deepest, darkest point and we're on our way out. But we can also see that we're still in the dark and acknowledging that. And, that's where kind of like that monk archetype or that quieter archetype comes in, the observant, the peaceful Buddha-esque archetype of like, yeah, it is quiet and it is a time of like reflection and a time of change, and that I hope it makes sense when I say this, but like that it's all the same. Like there's a way of like celebrating life that is buoyant and loud, and then there's a way of celebrating life that is like observant and grateful and quiet gratitude. Something I think of, or I think that is so on point as well for Sagittarius, is the body part that is associated with it in certain traditions. And that would be the thighs or the legs. So if we think of Sagittarius, it's often represented by a centaur, usually with like a bow and arrow or some type of archer figure that is always half man, half human, and half beast, like half horse. So I think it's just perfect. It aligns really nicely that that the body type associated really is like those legs or the haunches of this half beast being. I think it again is speaking to like this mutable archetype of like if we think of the wildfire imagery again, it's like fast moving, it's running from here to there, it's fiery and passionate, and I think centaurs are often depicted in literature and myth as sometimes thinking like Harry Potter, they're helpful, but they're a little bit like ornery, right? And like in traditional texts too, they can be kind of stoic, but they're also like wildly beastly and very athletic in what they do. I think of my husband and his love of like running and being active as being really tied to like the Sagittarian side of him. I think there's also like a curiosity too to Sagittarius. It's wanting to explore. It's wanting to like use this physical nature to like go the distance, to travel at high speeds for long distances, and to really like explore the everything there is to see in the world, and to explore all of the types of experiences that one can have, whether that is like going all the way to the extreme of like losing yourself in partying and like alcohol or drugs and experiencing what that's like, or all the way to the other end of things where you're living this kind of ascetic life where you are, you know, taking a vow of silence and living in a monastery. But like wanting those experiences and everything in between. I think of my son a lot, and his nature really is, I think he does a lot of things just to know what it feels like to do it. You know, and he's a whole being with a whole birth chart and many other placements, but I do feel like there's this genuine curiosity that is sparking it. And, you know, sometimes that can get Sagittarius people in trouble a little bit, right? It's like this curiosity that killed the cat type of situation, where we can push things too far in one direction and get burned a little bit. But I think the general theme is like wanting to just feel it all, experience it all. And again, it's like a seeking of like understanding the nature of the world, and like this Jupiterian kind of like seeking or questing for experience. So something else that I want to try out today is exploring the journey around the wheel as a Sagittarius. And I want to do this by looking at those stories from cardinal to mutable around the wheel of the birth chart. So if we think of a Sag rising, that means you have Sagittarius in the first house. But it's interesting because Sagittarius, like I said, it's a mutable sign. It comes at the end of the season. It comes at the end of the fall, and it kind of leads the way to kicking off the winter. It changes hands over to Capricorn afterwards. But this is like where Sag risings are starting. They're starting at the end. So I think there's some sort of like innate wisdom here. I think, you know, going back to those archetypes of like the monk and the party animal, it's like another one I like to think of as like the clown for Sagittarius. Like, I just think they're so funny. Or like the court jester, because they have this lightness about them being ruled by Jupiter. Of course, it's going to vary depending on their chart and where their chart ruler Jupiter is placed. But there's like this buoyancy and there's like this lightness to Sagittarius. But there's also like this wisdom, right? Like it's the end of a set of 3 signs. It's the end of a journey. So there is like wisdom that is gained along the way. So if we think of like the Fool card in tarot, or like the court jester, where it's like you're kind of like this happy idiot, but also like there's so much wisdom in being the happy idiot, right? Like I feel like the more I learn, sometimes the more I realize like, oh, it really is just that easy. It's like just accepting what things are. And even though it took me this long journey to reach that point, I feel like that's a very Sagittarian journey. And that there's so much wisdom in the Fool too, of just being open to experience and open to the road ahead, versus, you know, trying to control or just trying to think you know something. So anyway, Sag risings start with Sag in the first house. So there's kind of like this ending point that they're starting out with. And whether that's they've come full circle and it's the Fool, or they are starting out as like the wise sage. You know, I think it can go both ways, and it probably feels like both for them, just depending on what the situation is. So that being said, I'm not going to go straight to the second house. I kind of want to back it up here and talk about Libra, since it starts that journey towards Sagittarius. So Libra is Sagittarius's 11th house. And I think there's something really interesting here about it. One being Venusian, so it's ruled by Venus. So it's all about relationships, beauty, love. There's also something very Saturnian because like Saturn is the exaltation ruler of Libra. So having that in the 11th house, which is very interesting because this is also where Jupiter finds its joy. If we look at the joy schema, which I will link to, there's like a lot of structure to their 11th house. There's a lot of responsibility around the friendships, but there's also something like really beautiful there around like groups and the stage and friendships and community and like the collective, if we're talking about 11th house subjects. So it just feels very important to the Sagittarius archetype that this 11th house is ruled by both Venus and Saturn, especially Venus. Like there's something that Sagittarius just love about a fucking party, right? Like that is like what we've been talking about. And there's something about, wanting to have those experiences and wanting to like do the Venusian relationship things with people that like drives that curiosity. So there's something there that is actually like, because it's Libra and it's the cardinal sign that comes before Sagittarius, that kind of starts something that is essential to what Sagittarius is, literally, with the first house being all about who you are, your personality, your body, your desires, your like just who you are, how you talk, how you think. It's kind of starting in that 11th house. So there's something essential there to the nature, to like the little seed that's planted, if we want to talk about cardinal signs that way, that ends in a Sagittarius rising. So I think that's kind of where we get like this community-minded party person, maybe a little bit of a ham type attributes that we can see with Sagittarius. Very social. So then we transition from Libra to Scorpio. And Scorpio is the fixed water sign. So it's carrying out the airy Libra, like socializing party house mission that started in the 11th house into the 12th house of like deep, dark depths of the subconscious and of the unseen realm. So this is really interesting, I think. I think this really also adds a lot to that core Sagittarius archetype, right? Like we just had our fun like socializing party time, and then we're transitioning immediately into this very dark house. It's a dark house, regardless of what sign is there. It's the 12th house. But then it's also Scorpio, which is like, again, if we can think of Scorpio as really like one of the darkest seasons that there are. There's no light at the end of the tunnel in Scorpio yet. We don't see the light. So this is a really like dark space. It's obscured to the first house. First house can't see the 12th house. That's why it's traditionally called a dark house. It's a little bit of a blind spot. But it really feels like these two house topics, along like reinforced by the sign topics, combining together of like this lighter, airier 11th house that's very social, combined with this very antisocial, isolated, dark, emotionally charged house. It's Scorpio, it's water, it's very tied to emotions, and intuition. It feels like those two things combined really like that's the recipe for the Sagittarius. It's the light and the dark, it's the duality, it's the party people, it's the isolated monk. Yeah, that's what we put in the cake for our Sagittarius cake. That's the recipe. A little bit of Libra, a little bit of Scorpio, and then we land with someone who is Sag. And every rising sign is a combination. Every sign has a whole chart, and all of these pieces are going to come into play in different areas. But when we're talking about that first house really being who you are, I feel like it's just such an interesting thing that Libra plus Scorpio equals Sagittarius. All right. So from there, we move on to the second house. And this is the start of a new story for Sagittarius because it's Capricorn. It's a Capricorn house. Capricorn is a cardinal earth sign, meaning, again, cardinal meaning it likes to start things. It's where we can look at a seed potentially being planted. And it's earthy. So it's the material world. It's things we can touch, taste, smell, feel. It's very sensual in that way and very, material. I think of Capricorn as kind of like the world builder. Like it's ruled by Saturn. So it's got like the plan, and it's also like where Mars is exalted. So it's got the energy, and it's Earth. So it literally has the plan and the energy to build something physical or otherwise. So as far as the second house goes in that realm, like this is the house of your resources. This is where you find your literal money. It can also be where we find any other resources that help us. So things like skills, things like help that we may have available to us. So it doesn't have to be material, but oftentimes it is. And with Capricorn there, I would feel like Sagittariuses have a desire or like a need to really like start something around their resources, and that they're probably more concerned with them being a little bit more material because it is an earth sign. So like, if we think again of like the Jupiterian archetype, what's going to make you feel abundant? It's, well, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it is going to be like having material wealth, enough wealth to be able to have the food that you need to eat, having a safe place to live, having the material things that make us feel taken care of. We can't really feel abundant or optimistic, or, maybe you can have hope, but we can't really be our best Jupiterian selves if we don't have like these foundational things covered in a material way. So, very focused on that. And like very much a take action type of view on the second house topics. How that plays out is entirely up to where that Saturn or Mars is placed in the chart, or both. So it might not always play out super Capricorn, depending on the ruler of you know, but there is this like, the archetype there is the material and is like the taking action. And like Capricorn is starting off this story that ends with the 4th house of Pisces. So Pisces is the mutable sign that we're like building to. So we'll keep that in mind on our journey here. The next house then is the 3rd house, the house of communication. The 3rd house, I think it's my teacher, Adam Ellen Boss, refers to this as like the junk drawer, where there's like, I think it's him, I might be misattributing that. But there's a lot of things that fall into the 3rd house. We can think of it as like communication, how we process information, our local community, our day-to-day surroundings, like our local environment, our favorite coffee shop in our neighborhood. Neighborhood is a good keyword for the 3rd house. There's also a spiritual side to this house. This is, in traditional astrology, what's called the house of the goddess. And the way that I have come to interpret this is that it's a spiritual house, but when we're comparing it to its sister house, like across the axis of the 3rd and the 9th houses, the 9th house has a lot to do with spirituality too, but that is where I would put like organized religion. And the 3rd house is where I would put more like individual practices, more like witchy type practices, like ritual. I think ritual is a good keyword I come back to for the 3rd house. Things that you do on your own. And maybe you're doing them in community, but it's more of like a small group and it's less organized. It's not so institutional. It's also where the moon finds its joy. So there's something there about, things that bring comfort and things that, all of the lunar themes of comfort and nurturing and, a little bit tied to the body and to your immediate surroundings. A lot of overlap between the 3rd house topics and lunar topics. And this is Aquarius for Sag risings. So Aquarius is the fixed air sign. So we're back to an air element and it's fixed. So it's going in one direction. If we think about Aquarius season, it comes after Capricorn. Capricorn starts the winter off at the solstice when Sagittarius passes the baton. And then Aquarius, it comes after Capricorn. So it's carrying out that Capricorn mission of like, in this case, building our wealth, building our resources. But it's doing that in a way that's focused more on communication and ideas versus the more tangible elements of Earth. So there's something about Sagittarius's with this 3rd house that's like very much focused on communication, very much focused on ideas and being a fixed sign. I feel like there's something here around, commitment to like fixed, again, committing, staying the path. I think there's something around commitment to community and commitment to ritual and maybe not being very like open-minded in that. I mean, it's a Jupiterian, Sages are Jupiterian, but certain houses can indicate that are ruled by fixed signs can indicate where we're maybe a little bit more stubborn or a little bit more fixed, literally, in how we think. And Aquarius, again, being an air sign, so being very fixed in how you think about it. There might be something around, day-to-day interactions or like how they think about things that is very like structured and planned and like wanting to be very rigid in that. Might be something that feels good to Sagittarius is about like having a routine every day where they do the same things or they meet with the same people in their neighborhood or just really something that enjoys the consistency of third house things. And then Aquarius, so the Aquarius is carrying out the winter mission. It's cold and dry. And then it brings us into Pisces season, and Pisces season is fourth house season for Sagittarius. So again, we're at this angular house, the fourth house, and that means that it will be the same modality as the first house. It's mutable. Pisces, mutable water sign. So water, again, being more tied to our intuition and our feelings. And Pisces being mutable, being where we can see, again, the light and the dark. That's a big emphasis here. It's Pisces season ends with the spring equinox. So it ends when the light and the dark are equal. So as in terms of fourth house topics, those are home, family, ancestry, and the family can be like your family of origin, home meaning like literally your house or like how you build a home. A lot of times we can see fourth house signs influence in like how a home is decorated. But yeah, there's also like this duality. So, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. So yes, we get to Pisces. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. It's where Venus is also exalts. So there's something about having a Pisces fourth house that feels like, yes, it's mutable. Yes, it's changing. It also feels somewhat like nostalgic. I think, there's like this, it's dual. It's looking back and being nostalgic for what was and like looking back at what we've come through. And then there's also this like excitement and like looking forward to the future, like looking at that point in the spring. I know where I live, I feel every time we get there, it's like, oh, wow, we made it to the equinox. That was a really hard winter every time because I am not a huge winter fan. I'm originally from Florida. But looking back, like, wow, we did it. We made it through this really hard Saturn stuff. 2 back-to-back Saturn planets, or Saturn signs. And then we made it to like another Jupiter season, and we made it to another season where Venus is exalted. And then looking ahead, it's like, yes, like we've got lots of fun things coming up. In my tradition, like Easter is on the horizon. That's like a fun holiday after kind of a lull in any kind of like celebrations. It's also like just looking climate wise, like, oh, okay, like I've made it through the coldest part. I know that even if there's a couple cold days that are still ahead, that it's heading in the right direction. And pretty soon it's going to be like late spring and then eventually summer. So the light is growing. There's like this hope that's growing. And that is, even though the first 2 signs of the year, Capricorn and Aquarius, are ruled by Saturn, there is still this quality of the light growing during those times. So like Saturn can be very heavy and very much despairing in a lot of ways, but it's also like can just be like a commitment to this growth of light and this growth of like of something better coming. I think farming is very Saturnian. There are really hard things about it, but there's also the knowledge that it's going to grow. Stuff's going to grow if we put in the hard work and do it. So yeah, there's something about this journey from Capricorn in the second house to Pisces in the fourth house, where like what we're planting in that second house comes to fruition in the fourth house. And I feel like there's just something tied there to being like, whatever we are doing to build our resources is really this focus on that foundation and like setting that foundation up for success, whether that's like you have a big family or lots of kids, or whether it's just you and doing the work to like provide a safe place for you to live, and doing the work to provide a safe place for you to just exist, like I mean in your mind and in your body and in all of the ways that we can find a home. So yeah, I think there's something just really beautiful about that journey that's like starts in the second house, which is kind of a dark house too, technically, and builds to this angular fourth house, and how really that foundation is established by the work that we start in Capricorn, and then the work that gets carried out in our communities, and then the work, comes to its full bloom in its fourth house space. And then it keeps going. So that's something really interesting that I've been discovering as I've started looking at the signs, at the rising signs this way, by like the cardinal to mutable journey, is that mutable signs in particular, because the angles are mutable, the next house is always cardinal, and so it always ends, every journey ends with the mutable on the angle. So we start our fifth house journey. Our fifth house journey kicks off what we will reap in our seventh house. So the fifth house for Sagittarius is Aries, and this is the first fire sign that we encounter going around the wheel in this direction. So Aries is the cardinal fire sign. It starts things. It's the start of the spring. It's ruled by Mars, and it's where the sun finds its exaltation. There's something very, what is the word that I'm looking for? There's something very youthful about Aries. It literally starts the spring. So it's like when things in a lot of places start to sprout, they're pushing up out of the ground. They have that like solar influence that's helping them grow. And then they have that Mars energy that's helping them burst through to become visible. If we're going back to the imagery of like the wildfire for Sagittarius, I like to describe the imagery of fire for Aries as when you strike a match and it instantly lights up. It's quick, it's super hot, it maybe doesn't burn for very long, but it's fiery. It's maybe a little bit unpredictable, but it starts something and it starts a new direction. And this is taking place in the fifth house for Sagittarius. So the fifth house is where it's where Venus finds her joy. So it's things like hobbies, things that like bring pleasure in any way. That can be children is a big topic for the fifth house. Sex would fall into the fifth house. Anything that you do just purely for fun, that is done in a way that brings joy, those are fifth house things. So again, there's something, this is another fire sign. This is like the fire trine in the Sagittarius. In the Sag rising chart, it's the first, the fifth, and the ninth for fire. So, and that's going to be the case in any rising sign. The element is going to be the same across the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th. So yeah, bringing a lot of passion. It can kind of look like being a cardinal sign. It starts things. It doesn't necessarily like to finish things. There can be just a lot of like having a cardinal 5th house can be like having a lot of different hobbies and maybe like, you know, buying all of the craft supplies for like a new hobby, but then like never actually following through on it. There can be a lot of like false starts. I'm speaking from experience. But especially being like fiery, it's like I could see that being very excited and very passionate about something, but then like that ultimately maybe shifting quickly onto something else. I think, you know, being the joy of Venus, there's something there about like relationships. Again, a little bit of like a party house, a little bit of like that debauchery or like that type of like pleasure seeking that we could see maybe in the 11th house and just in the Sagittarius house, Sagittarius archetype in general. So feeding into that. But then this 5th house is really like seeding, again, the 7th house of Gemini that we'll get to. So Taurus takes over from Aries in the 6th house, and Taurus is the fixed earth sign. It's ruled by Venus. It comes, you know, right in the spring. Aries season kicks it off. Taurus continues that mission of like growing and greening. It's ruled by Venus, and it's all about like the earth goddess vibes at this point. The tangible, the sensual, things we can taste, touch, smell, feel again. So, and it's Venusian, it's where we also, the moon finds its exaltation in Taurus. So there are these lunar elements that come in that are about nurturing, that are about finding comfort. Yeah. And so this is the 6th house, which is tied to health and wellness, illness and injury, traditionally a dark house because it's not really visible by the 1st house where you are in the chart as a Sag rising, or as any rising sign. So yeah, it has some negative connotations. We would put pets in this house, which feels a little bit random, but it's also where Mars finds its joy. So if we think of Mars being the planet associated with like cutting and severing and injury and fevers and illness, you know, it makes a lot of sense that it's a dark house and that those are the topics that come to mind. But it's a little bit of a juxtaposition because this is a Venusian house for Sages, and a very sensual house for Sages. And I think what that says is that there's a great pleasure taken in doing a lot of those wellness routines for Sag risings, like, and maybe even in doing like the hard labor that is also associated with the 6th house. My teacher, Adam Ellen Boss, likes to call this the chop wood, carry water house. I can think of nothing more monk-like than that. Like, I think I've heard Alan Watts talk about chop wood, carry water a lot. I think that's who it might be attributed to. But, you know, that's what you do. Like, no matter what, you gotta take out the trash. You gotta, like, keep your house warm. You gotta make sure you have water to drink. It's all of like the things that are not super fun, but at the end of the day, they're actually like what matters maybe the most. And like there's something like really sadistic or like, I don't know, just interesting that Sagittariuses might really take a lot of pleasure in that stuff. And I think it kind of speaks to the duality again of Sages, of enjoying the debauchery and like the carefreeness and the lack of responsibility, but then swinging the other direction of like taking great responsibility and great pleasure in the mundane or the quiet or the solitude or the, you know, the life of a monk feels very 12th house and very like 6th house to me, of like being of service and enjoying that. And yeah. So then Taurus continues its journey till we get to Gemini season. And Gemini is the 7th house for Sagittarius, and that is the mutable air sign. So again, it's air. It's more concerned with like ideas and communication, and it's mutable. So like there's this big duality there. Like if we think of the quality of light again at that time of year, Gemini season ends with the summer solstice. So when we hit Gemini season, we can see that that longest day of the year is coming. And this is opposite of Sag, right? Sag ends with the winter solstice. Gemini ends with the summer solstice. So just like Sagittarius kind of has this buoyancy in that it knows at the end of that season it's going to start getting better, or, you know, depending on how you look at it, but it's going to start getting lighter. The days are going to start getting longer. There's hope. Gemini knows that at the end of its season that the days are actually going to start getting shorter, even though it's going to take a long time. And, you know, we won't be in the dark, dark depths until we get to Libra and Scorpio season. We know it's coming. And there's this thing with Geminis. It's like the duality of seeing both sides again. One of the things that I think I hear from so many Geminis that resonates with a lot of them is like, one day you'll be talking to them and they'll just be like, everything matters. I care so much about this and it's all so important. And then the next day it's like, well, actually nothing really matters that much. And it's done very flippantly. It's like, it's why they get the bad rap that they get for being two-faced. It's not two-faced. It's literally being able to see both sides of things. So I really appreciate that about Geminis. And then this is all happening in like the 7th house. So this is the house of long-term partnerships, traditionally called the marriage house. It is the house of like business contracts. I often see client work, like any work one-on-one with someone, tied to the 7th house. So yeah, any long-term commitments. Even sometimes I have found I have a lot of synastry with like best friends, like some of my longest friends I have 7th house synastry with. So I would put best friends there. And so it's bringing that duality there to those relationships, which is interesting because marriage is a big commitment, right? There's like, and any kind of like contract you're signing is like a big commitment. But there's something with it being mutable that like, you know, it can be taken lightly, but also like very seriously at the same time. There's like, again, the duality, the, you know, the knowing that there is going to be darkness and there is going to be lightness, the flexibility there. Potentially like having a mutable 7th house could mean, you know, having a relationship, whether it's long-term or not, like relationships like changing or evolving together, or separately. Sometimes that can be like many, many different relationships. And it's ruled by Mercury. So there's like a fast pace to it. Mercury is one of the faster moving planets. It's very susceptible to retrogrades, to many retrogrades. You know, that happens like 3 months out of the year, Mercury is retrograde. So when things are when it is retrograde, it's going to affect relationships a lot for Sagittariuses. But going back to the journey that started in the 5th house, there's something very like passionate for Sag risings with that 7th house. There's something that's very, it started with that Aries Martian energy that like is driven by either their hobbies or their passions or their things that they really enjoy doing and seeking pleasure in. And that is kind of like what plants the seed for what comes in that 7th house of Gemini. So while there's like maybe a flippant side to having a 7th house in Gemini, it's coming from this place of like deep passion that starts in like the joy of Venus. So there's something really beautiful there about that journey, and something, you know, along the way of like seeking or experiencing pleasure in being of service of the 6th house, and then carrying that into that 7th house. I'm very partial. I just think there's something so beautiful about that journey. You know, maybe, yeah, just Sagittarius meeting a partner, like by doing some type of hobby, and then like having those acts of service kind of lead into something more serious. That's my story with my husband, but I'm sure it varies, and it all again depends on the unique birth chart of the individual. So then we come to like our last little journey here. The next sign, the next house is the 8th house, and it is a Cancer house for Sagittarius. So Cancer, again, is a cardinal water sign, very tied to the emotions, very tied to the intuition, and very concerned with starting things. Cancer is ruled by the moon. It's also where Jupiter finds its exaltation, which is interesting, being that Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. I feel like what this looks like for Sag as an 8th house, the 8th house is tied to other people's stuff, other people's money, what other people think of you. Yeah, it can be very literal. I have a lot of 8th house placements, so I've experienced the gamut of the 8th house. It can be the stuff associated with the partner because it's the 2nd house after the 7th. But yeah, it's another dark house. It's not visible by the 1st house, and it can be a difficult place. But having Cancer there is interesting. It feels very tied to fortune. Fortune is, a lot of fortune is calculated based on the moon. So it has a lot to do with things that, you know, fortune being good and bad, not like fortunate. It means like it could be good or bad, and it's ever changing. So like the moon is changing signs every 2 to 3 days. There's like this ebb and flow quality to that 8th house. You know, I feel like what that might say for Sag is like having their lunar house here is like maybe the way they're perceived by others or what other people think of them is like very up and down. And you know, very, very lunar and very tied to what people are feeling like that day and maybe how Sagittarius are behaving that day. So, you know, they're a mutable sign. They're changing all the time too. And so like being in good graces with someone can change based on how you're acting. But there feels like there's like a silver lining there. Like it feels like it can be very difficult to have an 8th house that is constantly changing. Maybe less so for a Sag because they're not as concerned about what other people think. But remember, their first house is planted in Libra. So there is something that is concerned about what other people think. But it feels like the silver lining is that Jupiter is exalted in that house. So I feel like there's something that like, and I feel like I've found this to be true in my own experiences of like where regardless of like what stupid or like shitty thing Sag does, there's like a way of them kind of like coming back into good graces, or like where that like stupid fool or that character just kind of like still wins you over, and they're still pretty charming essentially, and at the end of the day you can't really help but like love the idiot clown that is Sagittarius. I say all of this very lovingly. I hope that comes through. So yes, there's something very like up in the air having a Cancer 8th house, very tied to like chance and fortune, but also like it's bent towards the good with having Jupiter as the exaltation ruler there. So Cancer kicks us off. Cancer essentially is saying something then about, it's going to say something about the 10th house, and the 10th house being Virgo, where this journey from Cancer to Virgo ends. So Cancer kicks off the summer. We're heading in one direction. I like to say that Cancer season starts like the lunar half of the year. It's when we know now, even though it's the longest day of the year, the days are getting shorter. The moon is starting to be more important again here. It's like growing in its importance in this half of the year as it gets darker. So from Cancer season, we go to Leo season, and we go to the 9th house. And Leo is ruled by the sun, so we get the back-to-back luminaries here. Leo is the fixed fire sign, so this is the last of the fire signs in the Sag chart. Leo, so it's ruled by the sun. The sun we can think of as just being, and Leo too, being a fixed sign, like the sun is consistent. It comes up every day, it sets every day. It shows up and it creates warmth. And I think I should credit Practical Astros with that, because that's something she said one time that is just so wise and has stuck with me. But so Leo, there's a warmth there. It's like having a fireplace that is consistently stoked, and it's controlled. It's always there. It's like, it's consistent, and someone is paying close attention to what it needs to keep it going and keep carrying the flame. And this is the 9th house. So the 9th house is where the sun is also in its joy. So I think there's something just like, I think I'm making a case for all of these houses, but there's something I want to explore more about the sun being in domicile and in its joy in a Sag chart in the 9th house. So the ninth house is all about long distance travel, higher education, religion in more of like the organized sense. Institutions and government would fall into the 9th house. Astrology and divination falls there, and also just more generally like our beliefs. So I wonder, as I started thinking about this, and there's some other signs that have things like this, where the sign that the planet that is in its joy in that house, or where the sign is in the house where that planet finds its joy and it's in domicile. And I guess this is kind of like where I'm getting into a little bit of research, but I'm thinking a lot about whether this is like maybe some of the basis for where like modern astrology kind of got a lot of what it is. And maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that a lot of the pushback on modern astrology has been that we don't have like the basis for it documented anywhere. And then traditional astrology has all of this logic and all of this, these schemas that are documented. And modern astrology has been kind of dismissed because it doesn't have that type of documentation. But I also feel like there must be something that has gotten lost along the way, because I don't think things necessarily just appear out of nowhere, but it could just be divine intervention too. And I don't think it's to say that it's wrong. So anyway, don't know about that. It's a working theory. But I also just think it speaks so specifically to the Sag rising archetype of wanting to travel, wanting to seeking out in the world, out in that ninth house of like seeking experience, seeking knowledge, seeking spiritual wisdom. There's something just so that I feel like you could sum up all of Sagittarius in some ways by knowing that Sag has a Leo ninth house. The sun is there and it's consistently seeking, and it's single directional, but also like Sagittarius is a mutable sign. So there's still like this ability to swing in a different direction when the time comes. So yeah, that's something I'm throwing out there. There's some other rising signs that I want to talk about that with. If anyone has done any research on that or has noticed that and like wants to talk theory, hit me up. But ultimately, so Leo season carries out the summer. It's very singular in its focus, heading towards the fall when we get to Virgo season. But it's kind of like, even though it's ruled by the sun, it's kind of where the light is like dying a little bit, which is an interesting juxtaposition. It's, the light is done growing at that point. It's shrinking actually when we get to Leo season, even if it's still, the days are still very long, it's still summer, but there's something about it falling away during that time of year. So then we get to Virgo season, and Virgo is the mutable earth sign, and it ends with the fall equinox where it hands it over to Libra. So being a mutable earth sign, it's very tangible. It's very much about what is here in the physical realm, but it's mutable. So it sees the duality thing. It sees like the equal light and dark. It sees that after the equinox, when we hit that equal point, it's really going to get darker. And it's also ruled by Mercury, like Gemini. But this is also where Mercury finds its in domicile in Virgo, but it's also where it's exalted. So there's something like very quick about it. Again, Mercury being able to travel quickly. Mercury is also the psychopomp. So if we think about that, I don't think I mentioned this with Gemini, but there's, again, this ability to navigate the light and the dark and going into the underworld and coming back above ground and going to meet the gods and being amongst the humans. Mercury can come and go as it pleases. And I feel like that feeds into the Sagittarius archetype in a lot of ways of like, having that freedom, or like appearing to at least be pretty free. And especially because this is the 10th house. So the 10th house is associated with career, public image, your legacy, like how you are in the most public point in the world. So it's kind of like what you're known for. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition too, because Sagittarius gets this rap of being irresponsible or, just like fun loving and carefree. But they have a Virgo 10th house, which is like, if you know a Virgo, Virgos are not fucking around. Like, they are getting things done. They are very organized, very detail oriented. Jupiter is the big picture. Mercury is like the details. So Sagittarius, I think a part of why they can be so lovable is because they do have this juxtaposition, and like they can have this big picture view, but then in their career they are capable of being very detail oriented. Again, that's all going to depend on the Mercury placement, the ruler of Virgo. But yeah, there's something interesting there. And then to bring it back again to this like modality journey, it's tying back to the 8th house. So there is something here about what other people think being of importance and seeding what Sagittarius ends up doing in the public in that 10th house in Virgo. So it's kind of like planting the seed in that 8th house of what other people think, what other people maybe say they should do, or maybe just even like suggestions, or maybe like things that are seeded with the support of someone else. Like maybe sometimes Sagittarius need a little bit more like guidance, or maybe there's something there with advice from some type of sage or some type of teacher. Teachers being very important in any kind of Jupiter ruled sign. So yeah, there's a seeding point there that gets carried out then through the Leo, through that exploration of the world. And then that gets taken, all of that information like gets compiled into like this Virgo 10th house where it's on full display, but it's like a lot of detail, a lot of Mercury. Maybe Sages are tied to like publishing or writing or like any type of like communicative career or public image. It's, if we're talking about the transition from like the 9th house to the 10th, from a Leo house to a Virgo house, it's like taking the experience and like the spirit of that 9th house and like translating that into a career where we're communicating about that. Potentially technology, I would associate that more maybe with like Gemini, but it's still like a Mercury sign. And again, having any mutable angle, it's like those retrogrades with Mercury are really going to come into play more. So very susceptible to retrograde Mercury in the career area. And maybe again, that's speaking to the mutable nature of the Sag rising. It's just like, it changes. It's Sages aren't someone who typically, depending on their chart, are going to have the same career for their whole life. It might speak to like doing many things or really reflecting on what you're doing and making small changes. So that brings us back to that Libra 11th house, where I think the whole journey kind of actually gets seeded for Sagittarius. And that brings me to the end of my talk. I hope this is helpful. I would love any feedback anyone would like to share. This again is the first of a series of 12. So I'm looking forward to doing more research, to tweaking this as I go. I hope you have enjoyed this, and thanks for listening. For more information about my work, you can find me at By Jove Astro on Instagram, at By Jove Astrology on Twitter, and The best place to find me of all is at my website, byjoveastrology.com.